And so this British naval ship captain decides he's a kind of adventure guy, and he decides to rebuild a replica to see if he can do this.
Oh.
And so they base it on a ship they found that's 600 BC sailing. They fact find this, and then he rebuilt it using as close to authentic woods and style. I'm Russ Barlow with True Seekers Foundation.
I'm Rod Meldrum, the Book of Mormon Evidence guy. We're here with David Hawley, the Steamboat Arabia ship.
The Steamboat was him guy.
Amazing, yes, that's right.
So he's built his fortune on sunk stuff.
On some stuff. And digging in the mud to go after.
Yeah.
Well, we welcome your group. It's a treat to have you here.
Yeah.
It's a remarkable collection, and it's an honor to present it to you guys.
Well, I've been waiting for years to actually have a chance to meet you guys, and so the five guys. Tell us a little bit about your story, real quick. Five guys who started.
It seemed like, 2 lifetimes ago, my dad, brother, and I were in the heating and air conditioning business, and I met a fellow on a service call that looked for flying saucers and Bigfoot, but he talked about steamboats that were buried, and I thought, wow, that's interesting. Went to the library, started reading about them, and caught the bug and started looking for them. Found the boat, pulled my dad and brother into it, some friends, and wasn't long, and we were digging into this guy's farm field, a half a mile from where the boat sank, or from where the river was, actually, because the river had moved. One of the things that seemed to me, our visitors, is such an interesting thing that rivers move. They had no idea that rivers move, but they do. The boat was buried there for 132 years. It sank in 1856, called the Arabia, on its way from St. Louis to the frontier to deliver all these people and all this merchandise. It hit a tree on September the 5th, 1856, and sank. No loss of life, but the boat and its freight could not be saved and sank, buried in the mud for all those years. And so we dug it up, got attached to the collection, opened the museum 3 years later, and we've been cleaning ever since.
So what's neat about the boat, 1856, is right smack in the middle of the pioneer movement. So you've got people going on the Oregon Trail, but you've also got Latter-day Saints that are moving west.
Yep.
And there's material on that ship that connect to the Latter-day Saints.
Yeah, we've got print type that was on their way to set up a Mormon newspaper in Council Bluffs for the Mormons coming up the river, and on their way overland. Thompson and Butts. The name of the newspaper is an unusual name. I can't remember it, but I do know that your church in Salt Lake has some of the earliest printings of this newspaper that they produced. Now we have the original type because that sank with the boat. So they had to reorder another box of print type that they would use eventually in their printing press. But we have the original box.
The Arabia is mentioned in history. The church is carrying some saints up the river too at times.
It was. It carried a family that joined up late, but nonetheless joined up with the Willie Handcart group. We all know that didn't end well.
A month after the Arabia sunk, the Martin and Willie Handcart company gets stuck in Wyoming.
Yeah.
So there's only a month difference. So they weren't on the ship at the time of that.
No.
They were on the Arabia before,
Prior to.
and then
They caught up with
Get
the group
caught up with
as
the
they were
group.
heading
You're
across
right.
the plains.
It's been said that this collection is the greatest pre-Civil War collection of artifacts that's ever been discovered. Is that
Well,
how would you describe it?
the boat carried 222 tons of freight. It was fully loaded, they said, when it went south. So that's a whole lot of stuff. But the collection itself contained organics and non-organics. Non-organics being the dishes, the bricks and such. But the organic material, the leather, shoes and hides and clothing and all that stuff, we're told is the largest collection of wet organic materials been found in the world from one dig site. And we've been preserving it for the past 35 years, and we're still not done. We're still working
Are
on
you
it.
80% done? 50% done?
Depends. The dishes are mostly done, but the lady that's sewing fabrics back there has a stack of like 30 coats she has yet to work on between now and whenever. So yeah, it's an enormous task.
Well, we've been involved with some ships and things that we were just talking about just a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
Involving the Phoenicia expedition and also the Vasa ship, which you mentioned that some of your technologies to be able to preserve the wood that you can see behind us here was actually some things that they were doing on the Vasa ship. I've been to the Vasa there in Stockholm, Sweden, and it's really a pretty amazing thing that we have these ancient ships and how important they were to the peoples of their time.
Sure. Well, the Vasa folks were whom we visited with in the early days of our learning to preserve things, and we picked up some of the tips on how they were preserving their artifacts, and we incorporated that into what we did with the Arabia stuff. We don't have the budget the Vasa folks do, so we were working in our garage and our kitchen and things like that to get this collection up and on display. Nonetheless,
one of the things I really appreciated about your family's decision was to preserve the history. So it's not just so much to collect artifacts, but it's to preserve a history, a story. And the ship itself and the cargo that it carried is a really important anchor to not just us, but mostly our children and grandchildren.
Absolutely.
To tell them that the history was real.
Yeah. And as you guys know, history just vanishes unless someone takes a concerted effort to put their arms around it and love it enough to keep it.
So here's something you probably didn't think about. You guys discovered this, about 35 years ago?
About that, yeah.
Okay, so when you discovered it, the 35 years that have passed since that time was about a third of the history that existed on it.
Yeah, that's right.
And if you think about, one more third, and we're almost getting to that point where the history's lost.
Yeah.
So it's really more important than maybe at first we think, is get that stuff preserved and the story told.
And story told. And it's not a small job, as you guys know.
I wish that our government here in the U.S. would have as much foresight as the Swedish government had in preserving the Vasa.
Well, they did good.
And helping you guys out with this collection.
Yeah, they did
good. Because I understand that in a couple of years your lease is going to expire on this building, and
the collection at that point is uncertain what its future will be.
Yeah.
So what would be really great is that anybody from our channels or the people we talk to would be to write a letter to Kansas City and say, it's really important to preserve the story of Kansas City in this ship too.
Sure, that would be great.
And this it may not make as much money, but it's going to have a much more lasting effect to keep this here as a museum.
Sure.
Than to turn this just into another money-making venture.
Right.
As a quick example, so there's a ship that was found in the mud of the Mediterranean Sea that was made by the Phoenicians, and the Phoenicians were one of the greatest seafaring people of the ancient world. And I can't remember. I'm trying to remember if it was called the Jules Verne 7. I think it's what it's called.
Okay.
But they actually found pieces of this, and it's now sitting in a museum there in France.
Really?
And trying to preserve that history of the ancient maritime sailing capabilities that were happening here. This is a part of American history that very people know anything about. But this was a part of the history that Joseph Smith and the early saints knew a lot about.
Sure.
As they were actually using these ships to go up and down, and then we had the canal and everything else, the Erie Canal and things that they were using, and this is just fascinating how you've been able to save this history, and I mean the buttons and all of these are things that were regular everyday things for the early members of the church.
Sure. Yeah, and to them this was everyday stuff, and they thought, well, it'll be around forever because that's what you always think about your history, but it goes away. And when you begin to look at museums like what you guys have described and the Arabia, the big difference is these museums, the big museums of the world, have the jewels and the finery from the ruling class, the things that the common people never could have. The Arabia collection, by comparison, is the everyday things.
Yes.
Of people. It's the toothbrushes, and it's the buttons, and the things that people would throw away. They wouldn't pass it on to the next generation.
But it also shows the sophistication of the frontier people.
Sure.
We kind of think of them as just these poor saps that don't know anything. But
no.
they were very advanced. They were on their way to build a community out there in the West.
Yeah, you look at some of these buttons, some of the neat things that they did, and you won't find that in stores today. We've kind of forgotten how this artistry is done in the glass blowing and all the artwork and stuff that they did on these dishes and such.
So you mean we've lost technology, that we don't know how to do stuff in 150 years?
Hard to believe, but
Where else has that happened, right?
I know.
Yeah, well,
Dave, what a pleasure it's been. Thanks
you,
very
Matt.
much
Well,
for
thank you
taking
very
time
much
with
for
our
coming.
crew.
100%.
And we'll see you next time.
I will be here.
Dave, thank you.
Certainly. Thank you,
Been,
guys.
been wonderful to have you here. It's been a treat to have you
Thank
share this information with us and the world. And we hope that that the Lord will bless you to be able to preserve this and continue to get this keep this going.
He's brought us to this place. I can't imagine he'll just leave us here and say,
No.
good luck.
Right.
Not going to
So
happen.
there's another chapter. I just don't know what
If
it
there's
is
anything
yet.
we can do to help with that and this preservation,
Well,
we
you
want
know,
to be,
you never
do
know.
that, so.
You might find just the right person, send him our way.
Right.
Right.
And thank you very much for joining us. Come listen to us more at our True Seekers Foundation and at Firm
Don't
Foundation.
forget to subscribe right here.
Both of
There
us.
we go. All
And
right.
come for a visit. Arabia Steamboat Museum. Kansas
Absolutely.
City.
Mediterranean, where the voyage of Nephi would have been down around the Cape of Africa, and this ship actually